So everybody gets a chance to introduce themselves. Let's go down the line. So the way this panel is going to work, we're going to do about roughly 30 minutes of these lovely moderated questions that we prepared, and then we figured about 15 minutes for audience questions. So be thinking about what you would like to ask these fantastic panelists over the next 30 minutes, but also please listen. So tell us a little bit, we'll just go down the line, try to keep it, a minute or two. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, your backgrounds, and what brings you in here to talk about education and games. And we'll start with you, Jessica.
Hey everyone, I'm Jess Pilsner. I am a teacher at Breakout Prep Christian School, which is just down at the bottom of the lake, so pretty local to here. There I've taught 3rd and 6th through 10th grade, and I do a lot of work with interdisciplinary subjects and using games, VR in education, so that's what I love to explore and see the collaborations that happen. So that's why I'm here to see what you all know about games in education, as well as get some more ideas of how can we bring more games and what games do I not know about that should be in the classroom.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Mark DeLaura. I have a small studio a couple of blocks away here called Level Up Games. I'm a 25-year game developer. Worked at Nintendo on N64 back in the day, and Sony on PS2, PS3, PSP. And then I spent a couple of years working at the White House in 2013, 2014 on games for learning and K-12 computer science education. So I'm here. I'm excited there's so many people here. So I feel like at a lot of events I'm the lone guy, like standing up saying, "Hey, we can use games for other stuff too. It'd be cool." So I'm super curious to just learn more about all of y'all and all these great people on the panel.
Hi, Melissa Rinchie. I teach in a 9th grade entrepreneurship course, and I have Melanie's kids before they go on to Melanie in engineering, so I have kind of a nice fit with the 9th graders. I teach a games unit, and specifically game design. So I had a teacher, I took a certificate program with University of Washington with Jay, and so it's a real honor to be here tonight to talk about kind of that, the idea of taking that application and bring it back into education and having kids actually design games that mean something.
So my name's Cammie Smith, and I work at AIE, Academy of Interactive Entertainment, which is a nonprofit 2-year game dev school. We're college level, but we think of ourselves more as a 21st century trade school. We have 4 campuses in Australia, which is pretty cool. They've been around for over 20 years. And we're one of the 2 US campuses. We started here in 2011. I have the best job in the whole wide world. I don't have to teach, and I don't have to be a student and take the things that they do. I'm the bridge. I work and reach out to the industry, do a lot of relationship building, connect with, hear what they're building, hear what tools they're using, what are they looking for as they employ the next round of devs on their studios and their teams. And then I come back and I work with our students. I help them with soft skills, resumes, LinkedIn profiles, all those things that seem to be really important right now. But the best part is I get to encourage and help connect the students to industry events. And in this city, it's awesome, from the game jams and everything that happens here at the wonderful Science Center to pretty much anything Tim Collins does. I encourage our students to get out to, because as soon as they build the relationships themselves, that may lead to a job and a career for them in the future.
How's it going? I'm Dan Dixon. I make a product called Universe Sandbox. It's a physics-based astronomy simulator. That happens to be educational. It's something I started working on as a side project just for fun 10 years ago. Put it up on the internet to use as a portfolio piece to get a job doing something else. People thought it was cool, tried charging money for it, people bought it, and then I was fortunate enough to get distribution on Steam back in 2011, which was kind of the golden age of Steam, when there were only 1,600 titles instead of the 20,000 or whatever it is now. It did really well. I used that money to hire a team, and now we've been working on the sequel for the last 8 years, there's 15 of us working on the title, and it is, so it happens to be educational in that it is a realistic simulation of the physics of stars and planets and moons. So you can use it to ask fantastical what if questions about the universe, like what would happen if another star passed through the solar system, what would happen to the orbits of the planets, because it's running a gravity simulator, but then it's also running some kind of a simplistic climate model and temperature model, so you can like see what the temperature of the Earth would be, and then something then you can or what would happen if Neptune was next to Saturn, what would happen to Saturn's rings, so it's kind of into the educational space. Is kind of something kind of fell into in creating this thing that was just cool that happens to be something you can use to learn about our amazing reality.
Great, thank you everybody. So that's our lovely panel. Let's start getting a little bit of a kind of the lay of the land here. I know a lot of us come from one of the two industries. Very few of us straddle both. So to start, when we think of games and learning, typically we usually think of games in the classroom or classroom-based game design. But I'm curious to hear, and we can start down with you, Dan, since you have a game that gets used in the classrooms. What are the major kind of opportunity areas that you see for these two industries to come together? And we can bounce it around a little bit if people have stuff that they want to talk about. Maybe beyond just the let's put games in the classroom and see what happens.
Yeah, so people do use, people have used Universe Sandbox in schools and in the classroom. It's really, it's interesting because it's a difficult space in that, well, admittedly, we have not done a good job of like making it easy to use our software in the classroom, and
what would that mean, making it easy to use the software in the classroom? What does that entail from your eyes as a developer?
Well, I think fair critique is that when a teacher decides to use a game or something in the classroom, does that have value, and how hard, how much additional work is it going to be for them to use this new thing as opposed to doing what they did last year? And so we have not done necessarily a good job of like making it like providing really easy steps for here's how you use this software to teach these concepts. And I think like one of the challenges with games is it education? Is there value beyond the fun? Like why? And kind of to boil it down, like what is the challenge of making something that's a game that's educational? Well, a game is just kind of the goal of games typically is just fun, and the goal of something educational is to learn. And if you're trying to make an educational game, you're trying to do both of those things at the same time, and that's really hard to do. And if you were to challenge me to come up with something else educational beyond what we've made, I'm like, well, this was the only idea. This was like my one good idea. So like I don't have any sort of formula for replicating this, other than make simulations of other realistic things. Except that's really hard, and hard in that like it's a hard problem to solve, and also that costs a lot of money in development and like like the educational space, in my opinion, at least from our unique weird experience, is that it's hard to sell to schools. It's because it's for a number of reasons, and then it's also like it's harder for a teacher to use a game than it is to just say lecture or teach out of the book. And that's not a critique of teachers at all, just the reality of that situation. So
From our educators, does that ring true to you both?
Yeah, I think you say a lot that's true. I know for me, even though I'm someone who loves to bring games into the classroom, the time it takes to search out a game that potentially could be used, see if it works, make sure it's an experience worth the time that it'll take in the class or any expense that I would need to either ask for or fund myself. And then when you go out to people who might be interested, having that it's hard to convince. Even in games that are as big as Minecraft, you're still convincing teachers. I think a lot needs to be done in helping teachers see that the way you can design around a game doesn't have to be all that different from how you might design around a field trip, because they're both an experience, and when you go on a field trip, not every single tiny moment of that is going to be aligned with that specific content area, but you have other pieces that are valuable as well. So I think if you go into designing your lessons for a game similar to any other experience that you bring into your classroom, whether that's a Skype in the classroom or an actual field trip, I think shifting that mindset and finding ways that we can help transition those thoughts could help that a lot. And I think that's where kind of that connection of bringing the two groups together is if we can start creating better platforms that teachers can find, where people who are interested are creating those pieces and they're readily available. Because right now, you have to search out random blogs, because there are some great educators that have wonderful posts, but they're all over the place and they're hard to find. Then you have to critique, is this worthwhile? Or is it going to waste the valuable time? Or is it going to scare my administrators away from games? That, wait a minute, this isn't as educational as I thought it would be. So I think if we started bridging those pieces, that would help kind of solve some of that.
I was gonna say, I'm kind of looking for something that's like TEALS, where they bring in a computer science professional into the classroom, but it'd be almost nice if they did it at the game design level, where you actually brought in professionals who are local to the area and kind of were teaching students about kind of deadlines and minimum viable product and all those pieces that they could do together. You know, and you actually had experts that have been working on games. That would be like my dream space, because you could teach them real skills so they kind of understand the project management piece, they understand about using assets, and they're actually making something. That's my dream.
Yeah, they have to scrum
Yeah.
in the morning. I mean, teaching our students that and working through that whole process is really powerful, and it could be a great tool. All those tools could be really great to teach them for any industry they go into in the future. Yeah.
I think one of the things that, there's a company in Madison, Wisconsin called Filament Games that is one of the bright lights, I would say, out there in terms of making educational games and proving that their business can be sustainable, which is no small feat. And something that they do particularly well, I think we can all take lessons from, is for them to make lessons for their games. So they don't stop, they'll make a game. And they make a game in cooperation with educators so that they know that they're targeting their target market, which is really educators more than the students. And then they work with educators to produce curriculum in a way that it sort of slipstreams into the curriculum, whether it's next generation science standards or Common Core or whatever they're trying to target. So that that lowers the barrier for other teachers to adopt that product. Still tons of other problems to solve, but I think that one is really good.
Great, thank you all. So, Mark, this question I would be curious to hear your take on, but it's open to anybody, so jump on. If this sparks something in you, we'll jump on it. What are currently untapped opportunities for games in education? Is there anything that we're not thinking about, like right now, that we could potentially do? I know we had talked about bringing game developers into the classroom just now, which is very exciting for me as somebody who works with students in classrooms with games. It would be awesome to see, hint, hint, game developers in the room. Yeah, are there any other untapped opportunities that we could think of maybe here on this panel for these to kind of come together?
I think you were going to go. No, I was thinking, because I was laughing with a friend today. We were talking about making almost controversial game ideas. So there's a board game, I know where it is. Oh, he's talking. But there was whoops, he still doesn't know I'm talking. But we were talking about, there's a board game out there called Period. And it's about women in having issues, and that we need to actually broach some uncomfortable subjects. And there's so many things you could be doing that are actually educational and still talking about real issues. And so there'd be between that, or you might be talking about, you know, like some of the social and emotional issues that we're not really able to address. And there might be a whole community of people that could, you know, be able to talk about things if they're only broached in a different format for them.
I kind of like a hybrid we're talking a little bit about games that are made for classrooms and then classrooms that are making games.
Yeah.
I think one of the 100 things that I find really, really interesting is the idea of getting those students in the classroom to highlight the ideas about things in their own life, problems that they're interested in solving, topics they have trouble learning, and things like this, and then working to produce those solutions, maybe in collaboration with game developers. Maybe this is your TEALS thing. Maybe we're iterating. It's iterative design.
Right here, real time.
I mean, that's the idea of a panel, right?
Right? We just work with each other.
It's like it's the democratization of technology right now, right?
Right.
Our kids have access to tools I never dreamed of, right? So if we can keep bringing opportunities on how to learn and use those tools, the sky is the limit. you have to see what this guy has built. If he gets a minute to show you on his app, it's just mind-boggling and a fabulous opportunity to teach and train and learn for me.
Yeah, I can attest. We have an internship program, and shooting stars at the sun is one of the top recreation activities there during free time. Sweet. Okay, great. So we talk at Foundry10 a lot about what creates value for students. It's kind of a centerpiece of the work that we do. We think a lot about that. So in terms of games and the stuff that we're talking about, what would be the value for students? Is there anything in particular that jumps out? Industry experience, career trajectory, the actual kind of collaboration that comes with something like a board game? Where do you think the biggest opportunities are for value creation for students?
Well, I can tell you where our students are working, some of the things they're doing, and these are just people, young people who love games. I have a group of students who helped build the prototype for a trauma level 1 curriculum in VR. Oh, how cool is that? And to be a college level student to work on that. I have some students, of course, building training and simulation videos for the oil and gas industry. It's really powerful what they're doing and the opportunities that they're getting. We have another group of students working on interactive children's books. You can come see them here, I think, at the Science Center, teaching children how to read. They are beautiful. I have another student who's working on this project, or hopefully going to be working on this project, with interactive, taking Pride and Prejudice with Jane Austen in a way that would I would have just devoured that as a student. So, and these are kids who probably sat there and played, some crazy game for hours and hours on their sofa, and I love them.
Excellent. Sweet. Anybody else value for kids?
I think for one of the things I've noticed a lot is just within that collaboration, just the relationship development, especially when you're looking at students not just interacting amongst their peers, whether that's mentoring down, so maybe they're designing a board game for students, or they're building something in Minecraft together, whether it's they're playing that game or designing it with another audience in mind. When kids are playing games, or adults are playing games, it brings out different sides of relationship building, and I think that's one of the huge advantages of bringing them into the classroom. And when you have that relationship while you're learning, studies show that that's one of the best ways to retain information. So when you bring those pieces together, they can be really powerful, both for learning, but also in those soft skills.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so, big question. If this has as much promise as I believe we all think it does, what are the biggest barriers for each of you from your perspectives as to why this isn't happening in a larger scale already? There's a bunch I can imagine, but I'd be curious to hear from the educators and from the developers, what are the biggest challenges to bringing games into the classroom for you?
I want to say programming. If you're going to start students now with taking like an AP course or an AP CS principles, then we're talking about AP Java. Sorry, is it me? So it's AP Java, maybe they need to learn C# or C++, and some of the languages that people are using, and that's that piece that I think is kind of a barrier, but they want to be, programming some more developed games beyond some of the things that we have out now. So more CS teachers, and then the funding for CS teachers, I think, is always at the back of my head.
As I kind of alluded to earlier, it is really hard to make software, and it's also hard. It's hard to make software at all, and then it's also hard to make software that people want to pay for, and then it's also hard to make software that teaches something. So trying to combine all of those at the same, trying to do all those things at the same time is really hard. So the idea of something that's fun and that is useful or beneficial beyond just fun is very challenging. And the interesting situation that we find ourselves in is admittedly less than 1% of our sales is for education, but that also kind of seems crazy to me, because we've kind of accidentally stumbled upon something that happens to be really just the perfect way to learn about space, because you can do these kind of fantastical experiments and which is the most interesting, and at least in my opinion, the most interesting way to learn. And I think studies show that's a compelling way to discover things. But yeah, so it is expensive to develop software and hard. So that's it's hard and expensive. That's yeah. And again, try to something that's fun and something that is useful. Oh, that's also hard. So.
I think within just the general ed class, so outside of your computer science class, one of the biggest things that still needs to be conquered in some classes is the pedagogy side. If you're in a classroom that is still very traditional, where the teacher is pretty much following the textbook, that teacher's not used to pulling different pieces of information and designing an integrated lesson. So I think as you're bringing in those games, while for the longest time I was very against it, like, I don't want a canned lesson, I'm gonna write it all myself, I'll pick something from here, and there. I've grown a little, and realized that those can actually be really effective, especially in somebody who's just starting out that's not comfortable in that design type of lesson planning. Because if you throw a game at someone who's used to following a worksheet model and say, here, this is gonna be great for education, they're not gonna understand how to use it, and they may have a bad experience and find that and decide that games aren't for them, they're not for their classroom, or just a gimmick, that we do need to be intentional about how we bring a game to the classroom. And that's where those resources that are findable, not on random blogs somewhere, are gonna be really beneficial. And also just finding, I can honestly say, I don't know how many games are available that would be great for education that we just don't know about. I did a quick search today and I found 3 other games that teachers had listed on I couldn't even tell you whose blog it was anymore, that I'm gonna look into because I just hadn't heard of it yet, and you have that time factor. So if we can find some way, as people who care about both of these fields, to start bringing those pieces together, we could have a really big impact and start getting those things in a place that's really findable.
I love what you're saying, because you're channeling everything that I would say in a slightly different way. There's 10 years ago, I think now, Ben Sawyer, who was one of the guys who coined the term Games for Change, built out this PowerPoint deck, and it was, every slide was a game and a teacher. Some entrepreneurial educator had found a way to use Civilization 3, and it was like, here's what it was, here's what they taught, da, da, da. And it was 80 or 100 pages long or something like this. And nobody else has ever seen this deck, and that's the sad thing, right? it's how do you get, it is, game developers love hard problems, and I was kind of curious to hear what you were going to say, Dan, because as game developers, we know, like, making a game is hard, making something that teaches is hard. Great, now multiply those together. Oh, and make money. And the making money is important, not just because money, but you can only make one game if you don't figure out how to make money, and then you go out of business and you go do something else. And none of us want that. We want the person who makes a great or even a half-great game for education to be able to say to themselves, oh, okay, wait, now I know what I can do better for my second game. And if we never get that, how are we going to get truly great games for education? So we've got to crack that nut in addition to the other two.
All right, so just to wrap up the moderated questions, and we'll open it up to you all, so I hope you've been thinking. For our educators, we'll start here. If you could, I don't know, make a request or say something that you would want game developers to know for you and the work that you do with the students, what would that be? What would you want them to take away from this? And Cammie, you can answer on either one of these, because you sit right in the middle. Or both, if you want.
I'm thinking. Don't start with that. That's 2 questions at once. I can't handle it. Yeah. Well, I mean, from just listening, wouldn't it be a divine, I don't know whose hat I'm wearing, but to have one resource, I mean, that we could all go to, like a library where there isn't
What did you say?
one already.
Oh, a librarian?
Like a library?
Reads digital information?
But no, but with
Sorry.
curriculum,
They're the smartest.
oh yeah, the library, with curriculum that might make it easy and doable to support the gamification of education, right? Would that be helpful?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I have to think about the other answer.
Melissa or Jessica, any last minute stuff to toss in there for the game dev folks?
Something that I've just found just on the user experience side is the ability to pause a game or an experience, or even to like jump scenes to different parts can be really effective in the classroom. I've shared things with teachers and it was too long for their age of students, and some of it was not quite ready, they weren't ready for, but parts were. But you couldn't pause, you couldn't jump, and because of that, they couldn't use it. And just in general classroom, being able to pause to listen to an instruction, or being able to save multiple students' games. I have a PS3 because I'm old school and that's what I could steal from my brother. And it's quite a balance of having to pause a game. I have 3 groups that can be using it and between classes. So just ability to pause easily would be wonderful. Simple, but
Awesome.
yeah.
Thank you. Was there anything else?
I feel like I'm right on it.
Yeah.
It was what you guys already said, and then I think I just kind of tied in a few questions, so I'm good.
Excellent. Okay, now we're going to flip it around. Games folks, Mark, Dan, and also Cami. What would you want educators to know about your process and the work that you're doing, and how to use your software? Please.
Okay. So, I think there's a misconception, am I saying this right? That games are bad, right? And we all know that some people think, oh, if they're just sitting there playing video games, that's a bad thing. So I'd like to have the educators realize that playing games is really good. And if all you have to do is Google gamification and TED Talks, there's like at least 50. Listen to Jane.
You could do that, but all of those ideas are, hard design problems or challenging, and we've already got a list of like 1,000 other things we want to do. Yeah, certainly I guess like more. I know we have actually had a lot of teachers use our title, but we've actually had, even despite in reaching out to them, relatively little feedback on how, like specifically what we could do to make our game better. But I also appreciate that that takes additional time, and no one has any time, and everyone's underpaid. So, I'm sorry.
All right, any last minute thoughts for the?
Yeah, what would I want educators to know from a developer perspective? I think what I would want them to know is I would want them to know enough about the development process, and also have them recognize that I need to know things about the education process. I don't think you can make a high quality game that teaches people things without both people working on it from the beginning. You can make games for learning. You can use other games for learning. SimCity EDU, Civilization, Kerbal Space Program, and lots of examples of that, Minecraft. But if your intent is to create a game that is to be used in the classroom, you need to have that conversation early. And from the educator perspective, you need to understand that game development is a slow and torturous process. I'm sorry.
All right, great. So at this point, we're going to open up to questions from the audience. Oh, it was lovely. Fantastic. I have more questions. I could keep going, but there's no need to keep talking. All right, I'm coming around.
Yeah, I'm a teacher librarian, and so the like a library struck me as a museum because it's exactly what we try to create. So what's the curation of libraries that would create the library of gaming?
I think I'm sorry. I was thinking as we were talking about it, like it would have to be from somebody reputable. Like if a teacher's going to be referencing this, like if you were to have IGDA
Yeah, look at
hosted,
me.
or maybe Foundry10, it would just be nice to have it hosted at some place where a teacher knows, okay, they vetted this. We don't have somebody who's a marketer who's saying, here's a great game, and we just happen to market it too. So that would be.
Excellent. Okay. Third-party investment. Sweet.
My question is about quality, and Mark started to talk about this a little bit. What do you consider a definition of a quality game, and is there some sort of framework for assessing games? There's a lot of games on a lot of platforms and applications that claim to be educational or for learning, but how do you assess that? Is it all contextual, or are there other criteria? Thanks.
I think that's a super great question. I will give you my answer, which is by no means thorough nor canonical. A great game for learning is one that you've seen people have effectiveness from. And because of the fact that right now they're not super popular and not a lot of people out there know a lot of people who are using them, research helps a lot. So as I think the piece of research I always point people to as an example of the kind of things we need more of is the research that was done on the Dragonbox adaptive version by Zoran Popovich, University of Washington, the DARPA grant, and if you are not familiar with this, look up Dragonbox Adaptive. It's a game that teaches algebra in a super clever way you can buy on iOS and Android. It's awesome. You should totally buy it. But they took the game and made an adaptive version that would give harder or duplicate problems to students that were having trouble on a particular technique, and also accelerate students through a curriculum if they were doing well. And they give this adaptive version to, I forget the number, it was like 4,000 kids or something. Like, this was a massive test. Kids from kindergarten to grade 12, and of the 93% or something like that that finished the game in 90 minutes. I'm going to blow these percentages. You should look these up. But I think it was that everybody finished the game in 90 minutes or something like that, and 93% of them were then able to, on a piece of paper, solve algebra problems similar to those in the game, including the kindergartners. I would say that is a great example of a test that shows you the effectiveness of a game for learning. It's also a little bit difficult to reproduce, but I think the gold standard, that's a good one.
I'll make my way up there after this. Okay, keep your hands up.
Hello. Question to pretty much all of you. For the game developers, have you thought about not necessarily trying to sell the software to the schools directly, but to people or to companies like the textbook writers like McGraw-Hill, Pearson, who right now have platforms where they do blended software, both print and online. But right now, as a person from McGraw-Hill, I can tell you most of our authors don't know how to do anything more than an interactive ebook. And to the teachers, would that count as something as like a reputable source where you could have something where you have an assignment, you click a tile and say, work on this, and it's just something like Universe Sandbox in an iframe where the assignment is move Earth to the right position to where it's back in the Goldilocks zone and it automatically gives you a grade or something like that? Would you be more willing to, or would you think teachers would be more willing to adopt that kind of content rather than trying to convince them to pull a game off of Steam? And to the devs, would you be interested in doing that, selling to the textbook providers, rather than trying to get money directly from individual schools?
I would say, because I teach in a district where we have 34,000 students, one of the things they look for first is the instructional materials approved? And so that's the first part. And so if it was coming from a larger company, typically we already have a relationship with them, and then it's part of an add-on. So yes, it's a little bit easier to get it approved because it's already part of the approved curriculum, is the kind of the short but not always best answer.
Yeah, we're a small company, and gosh, I think I exchanged an email with Pearson like 7 years ago, and then it never went anywhere, and and then I have not spent any time on that since. That totally makes sense. So yes, I mean, like a Steam of education essentially would be amazing, because Steam is like so great to sell on because people just buy it and they take care of all the logistics for us. So we essentially provide the game to Steam, and then everything happens, and then money shows up every month as soon as people buy it. But you kind of talked about like putting it in an iframe. Well, so we've also made technological decisions such that we're a downloadable, something you have to install, and so that creates a whole series of logistical challenges for schools. So ideally, if you're going to make something for schools, do it, something that you can do in a browser. Is a much better longer solution in that way. But yeah, yes, I would certainly be interested in discussing it with them.
Or McGraw-Hill.
Or any of them?
I can't.
I think I can shout.
Yeah, I'll repeat it.
Voice, right? So actually, Steam, Valve did consider Steam for schools years ago, but it was too early. Maybe now would be the time. But this was more of a comment about the statement from the gentleman on the other side that said that, how do we assess a good game so that we know it fits with education? that's something that makes a lot of assumptions, not you personally, but that statement makes a lot of assumptions socially about the fact that games have to make changes to fit with education, and education itself doesn't have to change. And actually, I think that's where we do need to change. I think games have an opportunity to change education where it needs to be changed. So I've got one, how does the panel and the teachers in the panel think about that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think within games, when someone brings a game, like, oh, you know, I've designed this educational game, and the kids get into it, or you get into it, and it's almost a replication of something that's been done in the classroom for so many years. When you bring a game into the classroom, the hope would be that you're creating something that's much more dynamic. And I think that's where oftentimes you see games that are designed for education go, which is why I have stopped looking at games that were designed for education, just because you run into that so often. So my focus generally is looking for games that weren't designed for education, because the lessons that come out of that are much more dynamic than something that they were so focused on. This has to look like it's fit for a classroom, and then we put up, like, it gets put into a box that prevents that growth. So I would agree 100% with that.
And I think for me, I'm more about the kids developing it, because I think their ideas are far more rich and they're more applicable than having somebody making it for them. So I don't know if that's the right answer to say to this group, but that's why I keep thinking of partnerships to help these kids with the development piece, because there's so much in that relationship with creating that with teachers. Like, that might be, I think, where I would see that games should be used and could be used more effectively.
Sweet, so we probably got time for one or two more, depending on how fast they go. Shooting for the people in the back, since I did the front a second ago. You're gonna have to shout it.
No problem. Although it would be quite ideal and resourceful, how much of a role should developers play in designing lesson plans or ways to teach a concept using this game or software? Would that increase the cost too much to create a higher cost of barrier for schools, which then creates less use for schools at the same time?
Everybody hear that? Try to
Yeah.
repeat it.
I think one of the best things I could see being done is, if as you're getting into your user research and getting the game into classrooms, if you working with those teachers who may be willing to help write some of that initial, it has the advantage of you're getting the kids' feedback, you see what's effective for them. Even better if you get teachers that are really great at listening to their students. And if you find within that kind of loop of the teachers that are first testing it out, giving that initial feedback, that group potentially could be really effective for those initial lessons and ideas to start that off.
Yeah, I would just add, I have no formal training in education or writing lesson plans, so yes.
Yeah, this has been touched on a little bit, but I'm a game developer, and I have questions on how to be profitable making games for education. It seems like there's a big challenge in making sure, getting your game in front of as many schools as possible and trying to hit a large audience. I was surprised to hear that Universe Sandbox, it sounded like only 1% of sales were to schools.
Less than 1%. As far as yes, less than 1%.
Is there any easy mechanism for getting in touch with lots of schools, or getting in front of a big education focused audience?
Let me know.
There are a couple of ad hoc teacher networks out there. There's a group called The Tribe you should try to seek out. It's a bunch of entrepreneurial educators. There was Glass Lab was a pretty heavy effort for a while on the part of Gates Foundation, MacArthur Foundation. They had a very substantial teacher network. But I think a lot of it is just, you just got to go to the conferences. You got to go to ISD and that and NCCE, all the things.
That was this week, NCC.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, in fact. All right, we'll do one more.
Actually, I was just going to echo a response to that, because I'd spent a lot of time at conferences. I would definitely hit up WACG, WASC, WIDIA, anything that starts with a W in this case. And then NCCE, those there's some that are kind of nerd centric. I hope that's not offensive here, but there's some that are very pro nerd. I would hit some of those up. That would probably be your best chance at getting. That's for some of you guys too. getting your face kind of in front of educators. So,
Thank you so much.
Excellent. All right, we'll do one more. For real, last one.
I think the opposite is true as well. How do educators interface with the developers when you're in that process before it ever gets to this we're going to write curriculum for it? How can the teachers talk to the developers?
I would love to see a lot within schools, and it kind of hits on some of the things you've said. I really like games even beyond just the kids developing, but the use of them as well. But if you can have loops where you have spaces in schools where developers can spend time doing what they need to do, but also hop into a classroom, and that's where the students could get involved and see that side of things. And that's like probably far-reaching in redesigning how schools work, where you have more industries working within the schools. But if you opening up those networks, I know at our school we have a lot of developers that do come in and talk with us. They'll do some things with the students and see how it works and talk with us as teachers. And I know that's been valuable on both sides. And I've really enjoyed the relationships we've had with those groups that have come in. So seeking those out and finding schools that have the ability to invite people in to talk with.
Excellent.
One of the things that I've been trying to crack on in that vein is if you think about creating games for learning as a pull model instead of a push model. So, typically as a developer, we make a game and then we go out there and we try to sell it. And hopefully you've guessed well at what the market needs and how to teach it effectively and all those things. Well, how could you do the reverse? Is there a way that you could solicit ideas from a community of interested teachers who might be willing to commit to purchasing a product, and then you produce that product for them? Hopefully you make it high quality and fun. But it mitigates your risk, the amount of money you're putting out in the beginning, because you know that there's going to be an audience out there that might be interested in that thing. Unfortunately, making games is not a science enough to make that super reproducible, but it's an interesting experiment. So First Book is an example of a nonprofit that kind of does this in the space of books. They have a community of teachers in underrepresented schools who will agree to purchase books that are bilingual or something like this that are not available. First Book takes those groups of teachers and will go to the book publisher and say, I have 30,000 teachers who say that they'll buy Hungry Hungry Caterpillar in English Spanish for $9.95. Do you want to do it? And have had tons of success with this model. So I'm working with some folks who used to be gamesandlearning.org, and we're going to try some experiments in the same sort of thing. So I would suggest maybe that's an interesting way to plug in.
All right, excellent. Thank you all. That is unfortunately all the time we have, although honestly the questions were fantastic, so thank you all. Let's hear it for the panelists. Yay! Yay! Well done, thank you all.